Good evening, listeners, and welcome to another scary episode of the Air Station One podcast. That's right, folks, it's time to get a little creepy when we look at H.P. Lovecraft and the Cthulhu Mythos. It's going to be a lot of fun, folks, and it's going to be a great time, and we got a spooky crew to talk about it tonight. Let's welcome Darin Bush.
Hello, Mike. Thank you for having me. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, my friend. How are you?
You could stop now.
No way, man. It's too much fun. I'm having a blast.
I'm going to wait to complain about the voice until after we're done recording, and it's the podcast has been published. So no, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
We're welcome to also have Kyle Mitchell with us.
Hello. Thank you for having me as well.
Oh, it is great to have. So it's always good to be here, have you here. So thank you for joining us. And of course, last but definitely not dead last is Mr. Mike Gordon.
Howdy. See, I can do it too.
I know.
But that's about the extent of it. That's about the extent.
I can do a horror podcast as best as the other ones, so it's pretty cool. So awesome, folks. We're going to be talking all about Lovecraft tonight. And, we're going to be focusing a lot on Cthulhu and some of the other stories and mythos around it. And it's going to be very interesting to chat about it and such. And of course, we would love to hear from you guys at home. Feedback at our Station One is the best way to get in touch with us. And, if you haven't told your friends and neighbors about us, why not? What are you waiting for them to die to tell us about it? So come on, folks. Before we get too dark and deep, let's take it away, Mr. Mike.
Yeah, Lovecraft is one of those authors that I've steered away from over the years because one, I'm not hugely into like cosmic horror, and I'd always been, to be honest with you, I'd always been afraid that reading his stuff would give me nightmares, and then while that is probable, I decided to finally give it a chance because now it was almost like, oh, the hype and the reputation of Lovecraft is so immense now that if I go to read it, I'm going to be like underwhelmed. I'm going to be like, I don't see what the big deal was. So I finally got a chance to read the short story Call of Cthulhu, which was originally published in 1928. And it sort of started the Cthulhu Mythos, which is probably, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, of course, at any time. But that this is probably the thing that Lovecraft is his biggest legacy. And yeah, we're gonna focus on the story and the mythos around Cthulhu. But I'm interested to hear where your journey started. And Kyle, we'll start with you. Was this the first story that you read by Lovecraft? How were you introduced originally to Lovecraft and his work and this story in particular?
Well, I have a very interesting experience. I got into Lovecraft that many of your listeners will probably relate to, because I think I probably had vaguely heard of Lovecraft before, but not until around 2000 something, early 2000s, and I attended Dragon Con in Atlanta, and I couldn't get into the two panels that I wanted to, so I went to like the basement of the Hyatt, I think it was, and wound up getting into an H.P. Lovecraft panel. And it blew my mind. I was like, why have I not been reading Lovecraft for years? And why has this missed, my radar? Because I'm a huge Poe fan, and Poe influenced Lovecraft, and I got into it right. I went straight home, went to the library, got Lovecraft anthologies, and the rest is history. And I think maybe the very first story I read was The Outsider, I think, but pretty quickly followed by all the major hits like The Call of Cthulhu and At the Mountains of Madness.
Darin, what about you?
So I was raised by nerds, you can kind of tell, and I believe I'd heard of Lovecraft from my yes, Mike, really.
I'm shocked.
I know it's I'm an iconoclast. So I was exposed to science fiction and fantasy very early. I was exposed to like adult science fiction, probably a little too young. I was reading Dune and Lord of the Rings, probably way too young, but it got me started down the path. Lovecraft was something that my dad, who was a science fiction collector and reader, he knew about, but I hadn't really read any of it. But then as a teenager in high school, I was working in a bookstore, and there were all these H.P. Lovecraft books in our science fiction section, which they're just sitting there. And I'm like, okay, so I get an employee discount. I've heard about this. Let me just get into this. I got one of the anthologies, and I think I just read it from cover to cover. So I don't remember like Call of Cthulhu being the first story I read, but it certainly was one of the ones that had the biggest impact on me as a fan of science fiction, cosmic horror, and Lovecraft, because it's an amazing achievement of a story. But I think I've read all of his stuff.
Oh, wow.
Eventually.
Mike, have you read this? Is this your first experience reading Lovecraft? And
No, not at all, actually. I've been reading Lovecraft since high school when I got my job working at Crown Books in Washington, D.C. And we had one of the anthologies, and one of the young ladies who was working as the assistant manager knew I was a Doctor Who geek and Star Trek and all that. And she says, have you ever read any, a horror? And I said, oh yeah, of course, Stephen King and such. And she says, have you ever read any Lovecraft? And I said, no. What is Lovecraft? Is that a romance book or something? A novel? And she said, oh,
Yes.
no. And she says, I want you to meet Cthulhu. And basically, she gave me one of the books. And
this was a friend?
Yeah. She was. And it was interesting. I didn't get into it as much as I thought I would. And I don't know if it was a maturity level or what with it, but I kept on trying to come back to it over through college. And it caught on probably in my early 20s. I was living out in Seattle already. And the woman I was dating was a very big Lovecraft fan. And she loved, Tolkien. She loved Lovecraft. She loved, a lot of the different, Lion One Shit the Wardrobe, all the different, books like that. And so, but it was funny. She didn't like Stephen King for some reason. I don't know, but it was just interesting. But I read the Call of Cthulhu probably the first time I was like 17, but I hadn't read it again until recently. And when you announced that that's what we were going to be talking about for the show, I went back and reread it, and it was interesting. I found this very similar to reading Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, because it was like from the journals and everything, and it was just real interesting, and I enjoyed it a lot more, I think, this time than I ever have. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, like I said, I hadn't read Lovecraft, and one of the reasons why that I had substantial reason to think that that it would harm me emotionally and psychologically was that even though one of my favorite books of all time is Dracula, I knew that reading it was it put images in my head that were very difficult to shake. And so and same thing with War of the Worlds. I love those stories. They're two of my favorite books of all time. And I've read them multiple times in different adaptations, different versions of them, et cetera, et cetera. But they have both given me images that are hard to shake. And so, I didn't really seek that out. And I felt like Lovecraft would have been capable of especially since in the late 70s, I think it was 79, I was collecting a magazine called Starlog, and they had this story about a movie that was coming out and being produced called The Cry of Cthulhu. And it was the first time that this was going to be attempted to do a movie on the Cthulhu Mythos, et cetera, et cetera. The images that were associated with this article of the creatures that were in this, those made an impression on me. those were, and they're not, and I didn't even understand it at the time, but they weren't of Cthulhu himself, but they were of these creatures that I was just like horrified by. If anybody ever seeks that article out, man, it is got a couple of images of creatures that I'm like, the movie was never made, and it never finished, never completed, or whatever. I don't know if any footage exists. I haven't really sought it out that highly, but anyway, so I did have some reason to think like that, if those creatures are in the books or the stories or whatever, then yeah, that's something that I'm probably going to just steer away from. Over the years, I've been curious, I've been really curious. And so I thought, I'm a big boy now in my 50s. I should be able to handle it, right? Like, and if it does stick with me for the rest of my life, how long is that going to be now, right? So, so let's give it a whirl and see what this is all about. So I got my edition of Cry of Cthulhu, and wonderfully illustrated. In case I needed help with the creating visions, right? Wonderfully illustrated. But at this point, I already knew what Cthulhu looked like. I knew a little bit about the mythos because of other things that we'll probably talk about later. Heck, the new song on the Tiki Zombie album is called Cthulhu Owl. Like it was, so I'm definitely playing off that, so I figure like, if I'm going to play in that sandbox, I probably should know what I'm talking about. So I read the story for the first time this past week. And first of all, the idea that it might have been overhyped or oversold, or the reputation might have been huge, like a mountain for me to climb, completely dispelled, because my expectations were not only met but exceeded, but by far. This is a really great story. It's not a traditional type story, as you pointed out, Mike. The way that it's told, I love the fact that the first two paragraphs are basically the author. It's because it's in first person. And for those people who haven't read it, we are going to spoil it. So if you haven't read Cry of Cthulhu, don't know anything about it. So we're going to go into some spoilers as well. But the author, or the first person narrator, basically talks about how, like, hey, I put these things together. It really is dangerous. I'm paraphrasing here, of course. It's really dangerous. I don't think anybody should make these connections, but here, let me explain exactly what I did. And it's like, wait a minute, you're just telling me that nobody should know this information. It's dangerous to know this information, life-threatening. And yet here you go, like, okay, now, like, turn the page. Like, there's a monster at the end of this book. Like, there's a Cthulhu at the end of this book, right? Like, it's very much set up like that. But the mythos that he creates, and I know that it's referenced, I mean, we'll talk about the influences as well, but the mythos that he creates feels so authentic by not only the details he provides, but also the things he leaves out, because he leaves just enough mystery there that you're making connections in your head, and it's just so effective that by the end of the story, you are kind of thinking, my God, how have I not heard about this? This is dangerous. This must be real. And it is quite alarming. So let me go to you, Kyle. Like, is that sort of your feeling about this story as well? Do you feel like it's one of his best?
Yeah, and first of all, you were saying the Cry of Cthulhu. I think that was the cry of Mike before he was reading it. And but the Call of I do. The Call of Cthulhu is definitely one of the best of Lovecraft stuff. It is one of the more epic, because Lovecraft has a lot of very small town, very few characters, very few even different sites, locations in the individual story. But At the Mountains of Madness, which Lovecraft said that he thought was his best creation, and then the Call of Cthulhu, another one of he thought was one of his best, and what are both really epic stories. I think At the Mountains of Madness is actually a novella, but the Call of Cthulhu, yeah, definitely. It's like you said, it's starting out very kind of epistolary. Is that the right term? Right, with lots of collected papers, and then also the statue that we can see a replica of there in Darin's bottom left corner of his Zoom window. And it's so it's epic. It goes globe trotting. It's and again, you actually do see a great old one. You see this eldritch god, air quotes, and that you don't see in a lot of his works, because Lovecraft based, he was inspired by so many writers, like you were saying. So he even says he's got his Poe stories, and he's got his Lord Dunsany stories, and so forth. But this was one of those that he and Algernon Blackwood, one of his favorite stories was The Willows by Algernon Blackwood, and you can see a lot of those little elements sprinkled in the Call of Cthulhu. That's this epic kind of archaeological investigation, detective kind of story, and then ultimately cosmic horror adventure. So
yeah, I mean, it starts off very small and intimate, the relationship between the narrator and his uncle, and this one person comes to him, an artist, et cetera, his uncle, that is, and there's but yeah, the narrator doesn't actually, I mean, other than do the research and collect these things, is not an active participant in the events that happen, and probably a good thing for him, although he does admit toward the end that, yeah, my days are probably pretty numbered because I know this stuff and I've made this connection, and everybody associated with Cthulhu and this is dead. So good luck with you now that you finished the story. Like, now that you finished and good luck.
Not only is the story done, you are too.
Exactly.
We just remember, just like Jesus loves you, Cthulhu loathes you.
Darin, what about you? What is something that that you take from the story as well?
This is really I don't think Lovecraft intended it to be, but this is really the flagship story of cosmic horror. Now, almost 100 years later, it is still the ideal way of kind of establishing what cosmic horror is. I mean, cosmic horror is not aliens land on Earth and want to steal our water or whatever. I mean, this is that these things are all from outside of our universe, not from off planet. So the scale and scope of this thing is, and Lovecraft said this, the scale and scope of these creatures and where they're from and the dimension that they're from is beyond our ability to comprehend. One of the things that Lovecraft put in a lot of his stories was that the names of the things and the language were all unpronounceable by humans because we just don't have the right, to try and not be too graphic, we don't have the right mouth parts. Mm-hmm. So our bodies aren't physically capable of pronouncing the language, so we just do the best we can, right? Our brains aren't capable of understanding what we're seeing, so we just make images in our heads to try and comprehend what's going on, and that process breaks most people's sanity. Suddenly you are fully aware that the universe is not alone and that the other parallel universes have things like this in it, and most people go mad just instantly on that realization. It is lucky for us within the Cthulhu Mythos universe. It is lucky for us that some of these people survive long enough to write down some notes that we can later read. And that's really what Call of Cthulhu is he literally says at least one point in the story, when he's kind of summing up, he goes, every once in a while when I'm working on this, I just want to kill myself, which of course, right, is, and he's not making light of the notion of suicide. He's very seriously talking about this is making me crazy. What it is that I'm investigating and what is going on is becoming more and more real as I literally travel around the world 1.5 times. And it's like, I can't deny this. This isn't a hoax. It isn't a joke. It's real. This happened. So I don't know what to do.
Yeah. And the weight of it is too much for me to bear.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah. Mike, what about you? What's something else from the story that impressed you?
It was interesting because it is almost like a detective story. The narrator is slowly putting the pieces that his uncle started and then taking it to the next level and realizing as he's putting this together, as he's getting further into it, that his life is pretty much over. and that, the more he learns about the legend of Cthulhu, he is, his life as he knows it is over. He is not, he doesn't have long to live. Anyone who knows about it is going to either get a syringe in the back with poison in it, or they're going to mysteriously fall into the water and drown, or, die in their sleep mysteriously, or, and it's horrifying to think about, it's like finding out about a secret organization that's been right under your nose the whole time. And it's like the blindfolds are being taken off slowly.
Yeah.
And the world around him is not the world he thought it was. And it's chilling in that way. And that's
absolutely, because the thing about the cosmic horror is not, as you said, Darin, it's not like, hey, aliens, Mars needs women kind of thing, right? It's more like this is like not just these beings from another dimension, but also the fact that they've been here before. They used to rule. Like, this was theirs. Like, we are trespassing. Like, we are insignificant little beings, like, trespassing on what's theirs, and they are just looking for a chance to return. And once they do, our time is over.
Literally,
that is very scary.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we're not even sure that we're food. Like, right. we're below food as far as they're concerned.
Yeah,
scholars are still discussing this within literary scholars are still talking about, oh wait, what was he really saying about our relationship to these things? And I think none, not applicable. I think that almost everything that human beings latch onto in the Cthulhu mythos about, like, our role in the universe is the delusions of the people who are trying to process what's going on. The cultists are the ones who keep saying things like human beings will be able to participate in Cthulhu's version of the world. No, we made that up. There's no evidence that that's true. That's propaganda. So we're like, I'm pretty much convinced that we're just irrelevant to them, and that is part of why it's cosmic horror. Is that the universe and every bit of it, and a lot of people have talked about this, nothing in the universe gives a crap about human beings except human beings.
Right.
We're self-important, basically.
Right. Yeah. That's part of the kind of nihilism, existential threat kind of philosophical discussion that Lovecraft sparks with Cthulhu and a lot of his other stuff is, does anything matter?
Right. I mean, it does seem like they need us to open the door so they can come back. Like, it does seem like, they because, I think the big line or the translated thing is that Cthulhu waits, right, for
dreaming.
Yeah. He's late dreaming for, and so it's not until the cultists in the story, at least, open the door in the ocean, that he's able to emerge. And actually, then even then we don't even know what the result of that is. Is he still around? Did he go back? Like, we don't even really know. And so he's out there. Sorry, Mike, what?
No, I was going to say, it wasn't even the cultists who opened the door in the book. It was the sailors.
Right. That's what I meant.
Found it by accident, and they opened it, and it wasn't even that's one of the things the author or the narrator said in the book was it wasn't even his followers that was able to open it for him. It was the sailors who did it by accident, and they paid the ultimate price for it. Literally.
Yeah. This is another part of, to build on what you're saying, Mike. This is another part of Lovecraft's genius as a storyteller. Is the narrator said that, but where did he get that from, and why does he think that? Is that really true? How does it really work? There is no explanation. We can only guess.
Well, he was reading it in the transcripts from that one sailor
Yeah, from Jorgensen.
Yeah, Jorgensen.
Jorgensen.
And everything about it, because
Yeah.
it was fascinating because he said, and the narrator was saying he wrote Jorgensen wrote it in English so his wife couldn't read it, so she wouldn't be affected by it and everything.
Which is another layer of the fear of the unknown.
Exactly.
That Lovecraft just wove in so beautifully through so many of his stories. And then, like you were all saying, insignificance, in the universe and stuff, that truly we are insignificant in the whole cosmos. And then when you think about that, yeah, like, okay, Cthulhu, didn't set an alarm, to wake up, and then all of a sudden that's pesky evolution. And then all of a sudden, you've got actually thinking, deducing human beings that can come and disturb his sleep.
I want some artists to do this thing where Cthulhu is in bed and Cthulhu's mom is at the door and Cthulhu's going, "Mom, 5 million more years."
Well, I think that's the other thing too that struck me when I was reading this, is that Cthulhu's not even the big bad in this. Like, and like Cthulhu is sort of the herald, right? That is bridging the gap between like our world and ushering in the great old ones and the pantheon of these entities that are so immensely hard to describe. But yeah, it's not even like, I mean, Cthulhu does do some damage in this story. So we do see the immensity of what this is, of what Cthulhu is, but for all his grandeur, he is just, or it, whatever, is just a small being compared to the great old ones, right? That are lurking on the other side. And yeah, so now so I've read this story. Lovecraft published this story in 28 in Weird Tales, appropriately enough. And my understanding is, and I don't know about this story itself, but my understanding is that Lovecraft was not really discovered until after his death. Is that correct? Is that he wasn't like he never knew how popular his work wasn't popular while he was alive. Is that correct?
Yeah, obscure name, even to people that read that genre, the kind of stuff, sci-fi and horror and supernatural stuff, right? Yeah. And then one of his contemporaries and friends that he co-wrote stories with and collaborated and so forth, August Derleth, basically decided to create Arkham House Press and then publish his stories and then make him a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and Lovecraft, in his letters, he talks with his friends because he was a prolific letter writer. He would have been on Twitter. If Twitter was around, he would have tweeted all the time, constantly. He was a very prolific letter writer. He would get correspondence from his friends who were writers, and they'd write stories in his universe, and he was thrilled. And then later, in his later stories, he would incorporate stuff that they'd come up with into his mythos, and he'd add their stuff to his stories. So it became this sort of like group project. And so I don't think that he saw any real like financial success or critical success during his lifetime. I'm pretty sure he didn't, but I don't think he cared. I think he was very excited to have this community of people, of creative people around him who latched onto his idea and wanted to help him build on his idea. So there's this great thing about where August Derleth, who's one of the neo Lovecraftians, if you'll pardon the expression, he was pushing for it to be called the Cthulhu Mythos, and Lovecraft was like, "Nah, I don't like that name."
Yeah, what do you call it? Wanted to call it the Yog-Sothory.
Yes, which we've already proven Cthulhu Mythos is a better title.
Yeah,
I just
stumbled all over it, right? Yeah.
But also itself is hard to when you see that word, it's like, how do you pronounce that? So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and if I'm remembering correctly, in the Call of Cthulhu story, didn't he even like call out one of his fellow friends and writers, Clark Ashton Smith, when he's talking about the all the global things that are events and stuff that are happening all at the same time that are kind of that he collect in the papers and stuff like that. He even mentions one of his only fellow another fellow contemporary, Clark Ashton Smith, in that. So like name drop here, like Stephen King just name drops another horror writer of our day.
Right. So my understanding is, of course, that the Call of Cthulhu, it doesn't end there. It just that this is literally just the beginning. That Lovecraft does refer to Cthulhu and the old ones, the ancient ones, elder gods, whatever, the mythos, so to speak, in other stories. I think Dunwich Horror, is that correct? Is that one of them that the mythos kind of?
Perhaps I think it's mentioned in At the Mountains of Madness. I think Cthulhu is mentioned, right?
Absolutely.
Gotcha.
Absolutely. I think Cthulhu is mentioned in a lot of his stories in passing. Like there's always that whole thing about, like, I was going through the basement library and I found this book on Cthulhu cults and threw it aside and went to the thing that the story's actually about. There's always little, like, he refers to himself and to his contemporaries in every story. He name drops. I think name drop is probably the best term there. He name drops his characters and creatures constantly. But like Cthulhu as an entity is barely in this story, and I don't think he's in any of the other stories. It's his influence on the world, and it's the kind of like the gateway to this larger conversation that really is what's Cthulhu is so important about.
Is there, so once you read Call of Cthulhu, if you want to if you're interested in this mythos, is there a next step as far as a next story, and there a next, like, or is it just sort of like not directly?
I would recommend going from there to At the Mountains of Madness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because the Cthulhu cults and the Cthulhu like spawn things are referenced as part of the larger story of what's going on in At the Mountains of Madness. It is a novella. It's a longer piece. It's the story of a scientific expedition, so there's a lot of technical stuff in it. His scientific information that's provided in that story is top notch. It's amazing. He did the deep research. He did it right. He had basically, I think the narrator is a geologist. Yeah, right. The narrator's a geologist, and so he goes into why they're in Antarctica poking holes in mountains, and then things get really, cosmic horror-y. That's where I would go next.
Now, looking past Lovecraft and the legacy that's created here, I think one of the reasons that Call of Cthulhu and some of the Lovecraft work with this mythos, I don't think a lot of it has been adapted into like feature films or movies or anything like that. So that's why I think they're still sort of underrated, if you will. And after reading the original story, I can understand this would be difficult to film on a modest budget, certainly, and also it deals with concepts that are very difficult. I mean, you'd have to find the right person to try to bring this sort of thing to life, as far as on the big screen or in a series or whatever. But the influence is huge. I mean, I know from reading comics and having seen characters like Man-Thing, or watching the Hellboy movie or Hellboy himself. There's a lot of like influence of, I mean, they're opening a portal, right, to this to cosmic entities. I mean, it's sort of like Cthulhu without being Cthulhu, right? I know that there was a movie a few years ago called Cthulhu. I looked into that one, but it doesn't look like it's very worth checking out. What about the legacy that you've seen that particularly stands out for you, Kyle?
Well, the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society makes some pretty cool stuff. They've made a few films and that they kind of make look like they are older, in the 30s, 40s, that kind of thing.
Oh, wow.
And there is one of the Call of Cthulhu. There's the Whisper in the Darkness, I think, as well. They also produce music. There's great solstice albums, winter solstice, aka Christmas Carol albums. So Away in a Madhouse, one of those classics. It's beginning to look a lot like Fishmen. Classics like that you should go and check out. So I do highly recommend the official H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society stuff. But there's a lot of stuff that is like Lovecraftian that is not really official stuff based on, and sadly, a lot of Lovecraft's stuff, as far as feature films and things you can find on streaming services now, are really just ripoffs using his name recognition.
I would imagine you'd have to be careful with that. It's sort of like Hitchcockian. It's like they sort of slap that with any thriller, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't really mean that it's really as that high quality.
But you were saying you were scared just reading some of the stuff and even seeing the picture in the magazine. One of the after probably Creature from the Black Lagoon as a kid that scared the crap out of me. The next movie that scared the crap out of me that literally I had to turn it off. I turned it on. I turned it off. Was Reanimator. Jeffrey Combs, and was that Stuart Gordon's film?
Yeah, I think so.
Herbert West Reanimator. And that's fantastic. I mean, it's still also kind of campy at point, whatever, but it's got some really good like effects and special effects and stuff in there. I highly recommend that. Dagon is another good one that's been adapted from his story. And I've always wanted to see an actual real live action by a major director to do that. I think it's Guillermo del Toro that always wanted to make At the Mountains of Madness.
I can't think of anybody more perfect to sort of adapt this kind of work, because I mean I definitely see his, with he did the first Hellboy movie. So there's obviously that there, but also just his other stuff. I mean, I definitely feel like that's present there. Yeah.
And Pacific Rim has some elements of the Lovecraft kind of mythology. The Cthulhu Mythos is soaked into Pacific Rim also, disguised as a kaiju robot movie. The influences of Lovecraft and Cthulhu are just everywhere. I saw Solo in the theater, and we got to the Kessel Run part, and I just started laughing, and the whole audience is like, "Why is he laughing?" I'm like, "It's Cthulhu. Cthulhu has a cameo in a Star Wars movie." Yeah, it's a giant space creature with tentacles. It's cosmic, right? It's Cthulhu, guys. So yeah, there are a lot of influences of Lovecraft on just everybody. Stephen King wrote a novella which basically, at the end of the story, you end up in R'lyeh, which is the place where Cthulhu lies dreaming, having a very long nap. There's a movie called Cast a Deadly Spell, which is like David Warner, Fred Ward. It's like, I think it's 30 years old at this point, but if you can catch it somewhere, absolutely catch it, because it's Cthulhu. It's not, they don't reference Cthulhu, it's Cthulhu. And one of the best twist endings of a horror movie ever. There's a lot of really great, funny stuff in it. It just like we can just go on and on. Kyle and I both own like a dozen different Cthulhu-based games. There's the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. There's the Arkham Horror series of board games, which are incredible. Quick little thing about this game. All of the different versions of the old elder things, or the great old ones, or the I think Mike at one point said the aged ones. That was pretty good. At some point in the game, you draw a card, and it's one of the great old ones, and it has all these things on the card that, like, this is how you figure out if you're going to survive or not. If you draw Cthulhu, the card just says everyone dies.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because watching Lord of the Rings movies, and in the scene where they were in the caves and Gandalf, they were crossing the bridge, and that demon comes up, the one breathing flames, and has
the Balrog.
Balrog. As soon as I saw it, I was thinking Cthulhu, in a lot of ways, and it was just, and it hit me because I don't know what I had pictured at that point, for Cthulhu. I knew the tentacles, I knew the wings and everything, and I saw it coming up visually, and it was just like, oh crap, is that what they based this off of and everything? I wonder if that was what Tolkien was even
Yeah,
thinking.
because Tolkien was influenced by Lovecraft, and
Mhm.
you make a good point too, that recurring theme of everyday innocent people who are way not qualified as investigators, then enlisting the help of experienced, aged people to help, and that's Gandalf, right? I mean,
Of
you've got
course.
the hobbits and Gandalf, and all, it's yeah, very very much Lovecraftian formula.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
what I was thinking. And it was interesting. And then it was kind of interesting because then in 2004, a couple years later, I started going to Dragon Con and going through the artist alley and around the art shows. There was a lot, and I do mean a lot, of Cthulhu
Mm-hmm.
and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like, oh crap, is this what I'm not supposed to be seeing right now? Is my life in danger and
Yeah,
everything?
it
So,
Yeah.
does kind of have that element of like, the whole thing, like if you speak the name, it'll appear, or if you see the image,
mhm,
then
in the
you're
mirror. Yeah,
doomed.
exactly.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, it does sort of have that
Even
sort of
Doctor Who,
feeling.
the Weeping Angels, if any image of an angel is an angel, is a weeping angel. And that's the same thing we were talking about before we started the show. Anything that is representative of Cthulhu is Cthulhu.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting how it carries all the way through and
Yep.
everything into even modern.
Absolutely. Darin mentioned Stephen King, and as people in the podcast probably know, I'm not a huge fan of Stephen King, but some of the adaptations, I've seen some of the movies, and one of the movie in particular that strikes me as sort of Lovecraftian, if you will, is The Mist.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
Oh, very much
uh,
so.
that one is definitely an unnerving movie, particularly with the end, and it kind of feels like the ending of the original Cry of Cthulhu story. Like there's just this sort of sense of dread that it ends with, and you're like, what do I do with that?
Yeah. There's a beautiful moment in the first The Mist movie, which I forget how many years old it is at this point, where they're trying to figure out what's going on, and one of the characters looks up,
Mm-hmm.
and all they see is that a couple hundred feet above them, there's just this large moving thing with legs that come all the way down to the ground. And like at that moment, the only thing you can do is hope that it doesn't notice you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very Lovecraft. Is I really hope Cthulhu isn't looking this way.
Yeah. It's like the Bambi meets Godzilla,
Oh
just
yeah,
I
yeah.
really hope that Cthulhu doesn't listen to this podcast. Um,
I have mixed feelings about
Nobody
that.
listens to the podcast.
and,
Mike, come on.
even Lovecraft kind of played onto that and knew that, because a story like Pickman's Model, where you've got a music of Eric Zahn, you've got artists basically in our real world on Earth at that modern time, whatever, the 20s or 30s, in his stories, they're inspired, and they are making art, of this that maybe they only experience in their dreams. And that actually, I think, is what Lovecraft did himself. He all started with a dream that he had about going to a university or library, and that kind of thing. So it's interesting. He did that as well, and really embraced that whole that art imitates life and so forth.
I definitely have to mention that after reading this story, I definitely understand. My friend Jonathan Chaffin, who has an organization, he was the one who first, at least my attention, came out with a Cthulhu tiki mug, and named his company Horror and Clay, which I'm like, oh, I get that reference now.
Oh yeah.
And and he's created some other Lovecraftian sort of mugs to go along with that as well. But yeah, I sort of understand that a lot better now. I'm overall I'm it remains to be seen whether the images are going to haunt me for the rest of my life. But I feel like it was worth it to an extent. But like I said, I'm kind of curious. So where do you recommend people go from here? If they read Call of Cthulhu, they like the story, what do you think they should follow up with next? Whether that be something that Lovecraft has done or something that someone else followed up with. And Darin, you got any places for them to check out?
I would in preparation for this panel, I found a channel called Horror Babble, Babble, and the guy who reads the unabridged Call of Cthulhu, they did it recently for some reason. Like, it's amazing coincidence. They re-recorded and re-released the Call of Cthulhu unabridged, and this guy is a great narrator, does a terrific job. I'm going to go back and check out their channel because they seem to be one of those groups that like really loves their Lovecraft, and I know they did like Dunwich Horror and other stuff. The other thing I would recommend, slight left turn here, is the Atlanta Radio Theater Company loves doing their Lovecraft. They've done a bunch of adaptations. For those of you who aren't familiar with Artsy, they go back and do old school radio, full cast, Foley guy on stage doing sound effects, presentations, adaptations of Lovecraft stories, among other things. So all of the fact that his legacy is so strong is really great right now because there's a lot of people doing audiobooks and radio dramas and short fan films and all kinds of stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I've been kind of going back to the other authors and that inspired him, inspired Lovecraft. So that's something I would recommend doing as well, because then if you like Lovecraft style individual stories, you go back and you can read Dunsany and Algernon Blackwood and others. But just like Darin said too, they're also now they're animated. You just search for Lovecraft on any of the streaming services, and you'll see there's a series of animated films about Howard Lovecraft, kind of meta as a character, an alternate history of him as a hero and whatnot. So there's all kinds of cool media out there that just run with Lovecraft himself and break the fourth wall, that I think are pretty fun. There's a lot, and then you go down the rabbit hole of all the comedy stuff that's out there on the interwebs.
Yeah,
you'll be there forever. It's a wonderful time to be a Lovecraft fan.
Yeah, I found out, or I was reminded recently because of some homework I was doing for Monsterama, that Disney adapted one of Lovecraft's stories and turned it into an episode of the Atlantis Milo's Return, which is Atlantis 2, that movie. It was a bunch of TV episodes strung together. And one of those episodes is basically Shadow over Innsmouth, which is the fishmen in the fishing town. And so there's some really strong Lovecraft vibes in a Disney movie.
Wow. Wow. Mike, any thoughts from you about where people can go from there? I mean, is there any other Lovecraft that you particularly found cool, or anything else that's Cthulhu related?
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned it earlier, and I'm going to bring up the original run of Hellboy. Actually, is very very taken from that same genre and everything, and the comics are fantastic. Even the first movie captures a little bit of it. Mm-hmm. But I think more the comics, and that's where I fell in love with more of the legends and everything. Because, like I said, I went away from it after I, read it in high school, and then came back to it much later. But it always remained in the back of my head. And then reading, like you could pick up the trades of Hellboy still fairly affordable. And definitely check that out because there are some amazing stories.
Absolutely. And just one of the many comic creators that is is inspired by Lovecraft as well. And so,
Mhm.
well, great ideas. And I will just add to it that if people want to know where they can go from here after this discussion, they should go directly to Monsterama because, first of all, because it's a cool place to go. And second of all, because Kyle and Darin will be doing a panel on Lovecraft's other creatures and other beasts that they've created. So we've got that panel going on. We've also got a panel devoted to Hellboy since it's an anniversary year for him as well. So we hope to see you guys there. We'll be promoting that probably at the end of the show, which is coming up pretty close because we're going to take a quick break right now and come back and then close it out.
All right, YouTube folks, it's interesting because a lot of the things I had written down for this episode to talk about Lovecraft, actually, Mike actually brought up during the episode. What other, mediums would you recommend looking at Lovecraft stories and such? And, I don't think they've, in the movies at all, I don't think they've captured Cthulhu properly at all.
No.
And it's interesting.
Do you think it's possible?
Yeah.
Hmm?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because, I like how both of you guys jumped at it and said, yeah, definitely. How so?
Oh yeah, and just like Darin said, I mean, don't do it like we want. The natural, heroic. Oh yeah, anyone can face Cthulhu. No, you don't. You're immediately gonna go gray hair and you're gonna go insane and start drooling and then die.
Yeah.
And with the whole perspective, there's some great art out there of like from the Call of Cthulhu and some of the perspective of how large, epic, he really is in comparison to us little puny humans. So yeah.
Yeah, there's a great Robert E. Howard story in this. He was also a Cthulhu author. And one of the things that Robert Howard would do, no surprise if you've read any of his stuff, is his heroes would grab a sword and attack the Cthulhu spawn creature and kill it with a sword. And I'm going, no, I mean, nice thought, but no.
Conan versus Cthulhu.
Conan versus Cthulhu would never, it just doesn't work. but there's also this, the thing that's happened recently is we've gotten a lot of people going back and being willing to do sad endings, bad endings. There's a point in Hollywood where they made them change the endings of several really good films. Little Shop of Horrors, The Plants won at the end of that. They made them change it because it was just too depressing. But now I'm like, no, between everything that's going on and COVID on top of that, I think like it would be okay to make an actual Call of Cthulhu movie and actually have the ending be, well, okay, we're all dead. It's I would like to see somebody approach it authentically to the story with the tone and the message, because then it would be worth watching. All of these kind of happy skippy ending Cthulhu stories are like, what? No.
Yeah, because the stories didn't do that. There were still at least, even if okay, one of the characters escaped, whatever the cosmic horror was, then there was still, you knew there was unfinished business. You knew that creature was still out there, or you knew that there, even in some kind of other universe, if it got contacted, that other plane of existence or whatever got contacted once, it can again. And actually, I'll say another media is RPGs, like tabletop RPGs and board games. One of the other panels we're going to be doing at Monsterama, right, is about the state of horror gaming, and we're going to be talking about some of those. And the gaming community can be credited for a lot of the role-playing game Call of Cthulhu did help spawn a lot of more interest in Lovecraft and Cthulhu Mythos back when it came out. Again, like 30, 40 years ago, whenever it originally came out. And yeah, if you want to immerse, I've been the keeper of arcane lore in that game many times. And so for anyone that's watching or listening that wants to really delve deep into it, they not too long ago even redid a new edition of the rule books, the core books, and everything for Call of Cthulhu RPG. And you can really live it
Now it's interesting because they recently did the story of the ship in Dracula.
Right.
The Demeter.
Yeah, the last voyage of the Demeter. Yeah,
Exactly. And watching that movie made me start really thinking Call of Cthulhu could be really done somewhat similar and everything, and very, very well done. Because you don't really see Cthulhu in the book, even. He's, you hear his description multiple times, or it's carved into out of a material that they can't quite identify and everything. So I think that could be really fascinating if they did that in a movie. And
absolutely, take my money.
Yeah, exactly. I think something like that I think would be done. And if it's with the right director, I think, and if done the right way, I think this could be fantastic and everything. I think
Yeah. And I think Guillermo del Toro, I think he's proven he has the ability to do it and to be dark, like Pan's Labyrinth. I don't remember that ending well. And so there's I think he gets it. I think he would do a good job of it. I know that this person is currently problematic, but I honestly think that Joss Whedon can reach in and hold on to the darkness, and I think he could pull it off too. This is a man who helped create the Borg, created the Reavers, the Hellmouth from Buffy. I mean, he I think he can do that, like nothing matters, existential dread, cosmic horror tone. I think he can hit it. But again, he's
bad news right now.
Yeah,
that's the sad thing about it. So it'd be very interesting to see.
That might be interesting. A problematic writer director covering a problematic author's work. That may be interesting. Maybe he is the perfect person to do it.
I don't think
we are all benefiting from Lovecraft's health issues and his views on the world and so forth at a very very specific point in time. And so and he decided, instead of just like you're saying, Twitter, instead of tweeting about it, only, he decided to actually turn it into metaphor and allegory that is scary as hell. So we really are reaping the benefits of that. That was his writing that we're now reading. It was kind of his therapy, his morning pages.
Yeah, he's not the first or the last artist to work out his personal issues in his fiction.
Yeah,
or her fiction. Yeah, it's
it's called therapy, folks, but it's put on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
Okay, let's end up the show. So that's going to wrap up another episode of the Earth Station One podcast. Let's thank everyone for joining us. Kyle, it's been awesome, man. Really appreciate it, dude.
It was a lot of fun. Yeah, go out there and read some Lovecraft.
Definitely. Anything you want to promote or shout out about?
Well, if you want to find me on social media, you can go to @PoetKyle and just find me on all the app. I'm working currently on finishing a Lovecraftian poem and short story. Hopefully I will have before the end of the year on my Kindle author page. So be on the lookout for those.
Awesome. And Mr. Darin, always a great pleasure to talk to you, my friend.
Yeah, thank you for having me back. I always love talking to you guys. I definitely have got to mention Monsterama. The website is monsteramacon.com. This is coming a little late to kind of promote it ahead of time. But if you're hearing this and you're like, oh, wait, I'm right down the street, it's very soon. Come see us. We're definitely going to talk about Lovecraft. We're going to talk about a bunch of cool stuff. But also, I do want to plug myself a little bit here. If you go to Amazon and search for my Kindle page, Darin M. Bush, you will see that one of my published short stories is a Cthulhu Mythos story in which I find the journals of a professor friend of mine who I believe was murdered by a monster in the Cthulhu Mythos.
Very nice. Very, very nice. Cool. Now that he's talking about it, this is probably the last time you'll see Darin in public. So it's okay.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the scratching noises at the window, and then that'll be it.
And Mr. Mike, we've made it through another one, my friend.
We did, and this one was tough. I don't know if I don't know how much longer we can last long after this, but we might have been tempting fate. But yes, it was my pleasure.
Anything you want to shout out about, sir?
Yeah, in addition to coming and seeing everybody at Monsterama this coming weekend, I'm really looking forward to that. Also, something else that's happening, and that you guys only have about a weekend to, I think, as you're listening to this, participate in. It's a Kickstarter for a book called an Anthology of by Valhalla Books, featuring vampire stories, and the talent that they've got associated with this are good friends Dacre Stoker, Jonathan Mayberry, the award-winning Bobby Nash, Ron Forti. Like, it's just like a who's who of like really great talents that are associated with this book. So go check it out. We'll put a link in the show notes. Go to Kickstarter, put in Blood Runs Deep, and check out this book, because it's going to be a fun one.
Awesome, my friend. Very cool. My shout out real quick is going out to another TV show that Judy and I have been watching. And, it's going to be, of course, the Great British Baking Show. Always a fun way to, wind up your week. And, and trust me, folks, I am so frippin' busy during the week. A lot of times on Friday nights, it's always great to just kick up your feet, put up Netflix, and watch Paul Hollywood tear apart these poor contestants who are trying to bake. And it is a load of fun and everything. And this year they've got, some amazing contestants going, and it's just a ton of fun to be able to watch it and everything. And, it's something that both Judy and I get to look forward to. And as we like to say, it's brainless fun. And we don't have to really pay attention all the time. We can, work on the computer, or we can read a book, or, play on the phone, at the same time. And, because like when you're watching something like Doctor Who, or you're watching something like, the X-Files or something, you want to pay attention, because if you miss something, you're lost half the time. So watching the Great British Baking Show is always a blast, because you get to be able to just, chill and relax type thing. I know friends of mine who watch, some of the reality shows, they're just like, that's why I watch it, because it's brainless fun. I could kind of understand that, type thing. It kind of makes sense. But you will not get me to watch The Golden Bachelor. Sorry, I will not do that. Nope. Thanks for listening to Earth Station One. We do appreciate you guys. Always remember, we couldn't do this without you. If you want to support the podcast, please check out our Tee-Public store and get some cool ESO Network swag. You can find the link up on our website, or you could also just go to ESO Network. We also have a link up there, or just go to Tee-Public, type in ESO Network. Pretty cool stuff up there you can find. Also, remember, if you want to listen to our show before the rest of the world, why not join the ESO Network Patreon? For as little as $1 a month, you too can help support the ESO Network and Earth Station One. Just go to patreon.com/ESO Network. We want to hear from you anytime. Please write us. As we said earlier in the show, feedback at Earth Station One is the best way to get in touch with us. We really would love to hear from you guys. Let us know what you guys think of Lovecraft, if you want us to do more shows like that. And I can give you guys a little bit of a hint. There might be a horror podcast coming soon to the ESO Network. Spoilers. I can't tell you anything about that yet. But remember, you can also find Earth Station One wherever fine podcasts are found. And now Earth Station One can be also found in video format on YouTube. As a little bonus for watching us up on video, we now have bonus material only available to our YouTube listeners. Pretty cool stuff, folks. So you guys listening on audio, it's still free, but listen to us and watch us on video. So it's pretty awesome. And you can see a little Cthulhu right there. It's so cute. Oh, it's adorable. See, this is what you're missing on video, folks. On behalf of myself, of course, Mike Faber, of course, Mr. Mike Gordon, Kyle Mitchell, and Darin M. Bush, thank you for listening to the Earth Station One podcast. We will see you all soon. Go to Monsterama. You guys will have a blast. Might actually even see me pop up there. You never know. So we will see you all soon. Peace, and we are done.